Welcome to Turn 1, a Formula One podcast. Now entering the grid. Here are your hosts, Thomas and Jeremiah.
Tell me about yours.
So we did not really coordinate this. We checked with each other earlier today to make sure we weren't doing the same rivalry. But it is interesting that I picked the next generation.
I like that.
So Jeremiah was mentioning with Prost and Senna, their rivalry was coming to an end early 90s-ish. But there were two... there was one young up-and-comer and one middle-aged up-and-comer right at that same time, early 90s, entering the sport, and they were seen as the next Senna and Prost.
Okay.
That would be Michael Schumacher and the great Damon Hill. So we'll start with Damon Hill. We'll give a little background. I wasn't too familiar with him other than I knew he was a champion. You've heard of his dad, Graham Hill. We covered them in the family duos portion. But he's from London. He was born in 1960. That's very key. Born in 1960. And keep in mind, I said we're talking 90s here for them coming into the sport.
Whoa.
So let's do some math there.
Okay.
So he's the son of two-time champion Graham Hill. Graham Hill won in 62 and 68. His mother's a rowing champion. This guy comes from athletics. Like, he's made to be in some kind of sports.
Sure.
So Graham Hill, dominant F1 racer in the kind of early days of Formula One. He dies in a plane crash in 1975. Piloting, I believe. So he was So he does that. Damon was 15 at the time, lived with his family. They did have a really nice home, obviously because of Graham's success. But that means now he doesn't have his father's support to the level that he did before.
Sure.
So he's got to take up jobs. So he's a laborer and a motorcycle courier. Motorcycle courier is key here. So he does this for a while. His entire 15 years, from 15 to 30, is him just trying to fund his career. And I don't think we talk about that enough because a lot of the drivers that have to fund their own career don't make it.
Yeah.
They do it for a couple years and they fall. They never make it to Formula One.
Yeah, and you'll hear about today's F1 drivers talk about those guys. It's like, oh, one of my greatest competition was so-and-so, and he never made it to Formula 2 because he couldn't afford it or whatever.
We've talked before about Charles Leclerc's brother, Arthur.
Yeah.
That you have to fund all the lower leagues until you can get to the level where sponsorships kick in, because that's when it's actually watched. Like, they're not sponsoring the lowest levels of stuff because no one's watching that.
Sure.
So, Arthur Leclerc has to work his way up into the Formula Series to even get sponsorship so that his family doesn't have to fund him anymore. It was happening back then, too. He was a motorcycle courier. So what does he do? I kind of like driving this thing around. My dad was a racer. I'm going to race motorcycles.
Oh, jeez. He went the MotoGP route.
The MotoGP route. And this was all regional European competitions. He wore the same helmet design as his father, a navy blue helmet with 8 white oars across it, signaling the London Rowing Club. Originally, I thought it was because his dad was in the Navy. No, very specifically because his dad rowed with the London Rowing Club.
Huh.
And so his dad wore a navy blue helmet with white oars on it, so he wore a navy blue helmet with white oars on it.
I'm going to look that up.
Oars is a relative term. That's what they call them. They kind of look like pointy little rectangle things, but either way, that's what they call them. And he funded his early motorcycle career as being a laborer. I guess he stopped doing the motorcycle courier thing, and he was just doing odd jobs, like physical labor type stuff, and then would go race nights and weekends.
Okay.
I think this was, that's probably most people's career doing this, but again, you don't hear a lot of them making it, so you don't hear the stories that much. Okay, so moving on. Again, that was covered from 1975. I'm now going to skip ahead to 1986.
Jeez.
10, 11 years of doing this. He's finally at the point where he wants to go to the British F3 route. been doing this for 11
British
years.
F3?
He says, I'm 25, 26. I want to go do British F3.
Well, I'm not getting any younger.
He loses his biggest sponsor, Ryko.
Oh,
Funding his career at this point.
no.
And the team that was going to bring him on, so like there's a team that's going to bring him on. It was like Westway something or Wester Racing.
Okay.
They have a teammate planned for him named Bert Fabi. He dies like weeks after he loses his sponsorship deal. So now not only does he not have money, the team doesn't have a teammate. All offers pulled. He's not going to British F3.
Oh, no. This is the same year.
Yeah, this all happened within weeks. Like he was all ready to go British F3 and then loses everything. I pulled this quote because this shows you the mindset of this guy. This guy was like clearly determined to somehow keep racing, right? And at no point had he mentioned, I'm going to make it to where my dad was. I'm going to be an F1 champion. But clearly he wants to stay in the sport and he just has to keep finding funding. When Bert was killed, I took the conscious decision that I wasn't going to stop doing that sort of thing. It's just not competing. It's doing something more exciting. I'm at my fullest skiing, racing, or whatever, and I'm more frightened of letting it all slip, reaching 60, and finding I've done nothing.
That's pretty powerful.
So his future teammate passes away. He loses his sponsorship, and he says, yeah, I'm not done. I'm going to do this more now because of that. So he didn't have the funding for F3. He also didn't have the funding for F3000. This skips ahead a couple more years. I also pulled this quote. I ended up having to reappraise my career a bit. The first thing was to realize how lucky I was to be driving anything. I made the decision that whatever I drove, I would do it to the best of my ability and see where it led. So again, he probably has aspirations of being a big name driver, but he's in his mid to late 20s at this point, and he's like, look, I'm working, I'm making money, and I can fund this hobby of mine.
So for reference, he's a little bit older than you and I are now.
Yep.
And he's trying
He's a laborer,
to get into
a motorcycle
F1.
courier, and he's just trying to fund his career one paycheck at a time.
Wow.
Yeah. That'd be like you or I taking our entire paychecks and then using it all to go karting.
Yeah, like imagine if right now you quit your job, moved to Europe, and tried to work some low-end jobs trying to fund a Formula One career.
Laying bricks or painting or handyman services. Yeah, and then you've got to have a garage and a shop and a, yeah.
Jeez.
So we started this conversation in 1975 when he was 15. We are now at 1990. 15 years.
Jesus.
He's now 30-ish.
Okay.
He gets a half season with the F3000 team Mooncraft.
For what?
He gets half a season.
Okay.
So the back half of the season with the F3000 team called Mooncraft.
F3000.
Yes.
So we're still not even.
We're not close.
Oh my God.
He gets 3 poles and 0 wins in 1990.
That's not bad, I guess. 0 wins sucks, but 3 poles is pretty good.
1991. Still an F3000, but now he's a test driver for Williams.
All right. We're making progress.
So, yeah, 1991 test driver for Williams. Does that for a year. 1992, 3 races in, he gets a seat at Brabham.
All right.
There was a lot of test driver moves and real wonky contracts. So, Brabham was in discussion, Williams was in discussion, Jordan was in discussion, Benetton was in discussion. All of them were trying to move these drivers around, and it ended up where he gets to a seat at Brabham because of their driver situation. He is still the test driver for Williams throughout that season while racing for Brabham full time.
Isn't that a conflict of interest?
That's what I was saying about these contracts getting wonky. So he still had to fulfill all of his duties of the Williams test driver.
Okay.
So I guess during the week or whatever, he's running a Williams car, providing them data, and then on the weekends he sits in a Brabham and goes around the track. I should also add Brabham is on the verge of bankruptcy at this point, so I don't really think they have any leveraging room. Because let me fast forward to 1993 when Brabham dissolves as a team.
No.
So Damon Hill finally gets his big shot with the team. He's on Brabham. They're like, yeah, we don't have any money.
Oh, no.
So he's back to the money trouble that he had before. He's like, now I got to fund an F1 team. No, so when Brabham dissolves, it actually turns out to be a big break for him because I guess he showed enough, or maybe this was a conscious decision. I don't know. He's promoted to Williams with a race seat full time. This is like his first really full time race seat
Sure.
with a legit team. with his teammate, 3-time champion Alain Prost.
Whoa! Okay. So this is
1993.
his final season.
Yep.
Wow, that's so cool.
So again, 1975, his father passes away. He's 15. He takes up being a motorcycle courier and a laborer. 1993, he's in an F1 car.
So this is quite literally you picking up exactly where I left off.
Yeah. Like I said, it's the next generation.
Wow, that's cool.
Okay, let's go talk about Michael Schumacher. So I'm going to leave that in 1993, okay? Michael Schumacher, son of a bricklayer / part-time kart track manager. He got into kart track managing after his son got into it. His mom also managed the canteen at the kart track, so I guess they had a little place to go get drinks and all that.
Sure.
So they're keeping it in the family. Michael Schumacher, y'all are all familiar with the name. I don't care how new to F1 you are. You've heard of Michael Schumacher if you're into any type of sports. Big name. He gets into racing at the age of 4. Whereas Damon was really kind of just starting it at 15 with motorcycles.
Here's where this gets weird for me. I told you Ayrton Senna didn't start until he was 13. He first had his interest in motorsports at 4.
Yep.
But he wasn't developed motor skills wise.
Very similar to like when we were talking about Bruce McLaren, I think at age 4.
Wow. Dude, the similarities in these guys is just nuts.
We missed it by 21 years.
Yeah. If I had just started,
What, I'm 4? Hey, Timmy, get into karting.
Yeah, like what?
So at age 4, his dad does the thing where the modern equivalent would be you take a Milwaukee or DeWalt battery and strap it to a Power Wheels, but his dad gets the old school pedal carts, like those metal box cars with the little pedals in them, basically, and puts an engine on it.
All right.
Not made for an engine at all.
It's a man.
And then a couple, I guess, I don't know, it wasn't years after that, maybe it was years. His dad builds him an actual go-kart from scratch. He had to take on 2 jobs to be able to do this for his son, but he basically said, hey, Michael, you're into this, you're good at this, I'm going to build you a cart, and we're going to do this full-time.
I'd like to say, as an adult who's trying to buy a cart himself, I feel like I would need a second job if I wanted to get into the sport.
So his dad was doing the bricklaying and then started running the kart track. And I guess that's maybe where he scrounged up the parts to build the cart. And then he could have his son go out and run it because he was the manager.
Wow.
And then his mom could give him drinks and food because she was running the canteen. I don't know. They had it all figured out, the Schumachers did. So when Michael got to the level where his family funding wasn't enough anymore, right? He was reaching this point that Damon did where I need some big time bucks to keep staying in this. He basically went door to door and got sponsors.
I don't blame him.
No, so he was going through his Germantown or whatever and asking anybody that had company, businesses, whatever, to throw their name on his stuff so that he could keep working his way up the ranks. Because at that point, you were having to buy very spec engines that had to meet things, and they were getting very expensive to buy these engines.
That makes sense. They're expensive today.
So he's only 12 at this point. He's 12, and he was born in 1969. So I said Damon Hill was born in 1960. Michael Schumacher was born in 1969. They are going to overlap at the same time. Just let that sink in.
9 years apart. Jeez.
In Germany, you had to get a karting license, or you had to have a special license to be able to kart on a professional type circuit or a semi-pro type circuit. The age limit was 14. You had to be 14 years old. He's 12.
Missed it by that much.
He's like, all right, I'll go to Luxembourg because they only make you be 12. So he gets a Luxembourg karting racing license, goes back to Germany, and then immediately starts winning all the German junior championships with his Luxembourg license. He gets his German license a year after winning all those 2 champions, I think, in a row. So it was either 1 or 2 of those German championships until he got his actual German license. But he eventually,
that's greatness.
Yeah. So, again, this is age 12 through 15 at this point. He wins literally every regional karting championship there is. I would name them all, but literally all of them that existed at the time, he won them all.
Sounds about right. I mean, if we're keeping in consistency with all of these other drivers, all these other greats, it kind of seems like they all do the same thing in karting. They just dominate.
So he, at the time, they all kind of have this working man story because at the time, that's not your full-time job. Like today, you could probably be a kid and be in one of those lower pro racing leagues. Like you see like the kids that do like the dirt bike racing.
Right.
They're making big time money. They weren't doing that back then.
No.
So he was working as a mechanic while he was doing this. I want to get the year right so that we can keep track of these age things, but he moves into German Formula Ford and Formula Koenig, which I didn't even know was a thing. This is 1988 at this point.
1988, the very first year that Ayrton Senna and Alain Prost joined forces.
And he's pretty close. He's racing in Formula Series now in 1988, so he's almost there. So this is the exact time that Prost and Senna are duking it out on the track.
This is wild.
I know. He is the German F3 title in 1990. That's why I brought up earlier during your statements, all the Formula things were decentralized. They were all regional. So he wins the German F3 title in 1990. And then he does a really interesting move that probably would be frowned on by a lot of people, but he got it from a mentor. So he's working for a guy named Willy Weber at the time. Willy Weber's funding this F3 situation that he's got going on. And he says, hey, you need to go to the World Sports Car Championship, which is more like souped up production cars, not single-seater open-wheel racing.
Right.
He says it's more professional. You'll get used to the media. You'll get used to the teams. You'll get used to the communication doing that more than you will these regional Formula Series.
Okay.
So him and a couple of like teammates or guys that this Willy Weber guy was funding all pack it up in 1990, and they go do the World Sports Car Championship instead of continuing to do single-seater series.
Very unorthodox, but okay.
It worked.
I guess so. Hey guys, this is Jeremiah, co-host of Turn 1 Podcast. We're going to get right back to this week's episode, but first I wanted to let you know where you can go to find us. You can find us on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok at Turn 1 Podcast. If you want to check out our audio-only version, you can check us out on Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts at Turn 1, a Formula One podcast. For any questions, concerns, you can reach us at trn1podcast@gmail.com. All right, let's get back to it.
So at this point, he is already like world renowned, or at least regionally renowned, for being a clutch driver. He gets fast laps when fast laps matter. And he's just doing Formula 3 in World Sports Car things, and they already know Schumacher is clutch.
What a title, first off. Can you imagine somebody calling you a clutch driver?
When you're like 20.
Yeah. Like,
and you haven't even made it to the big leagues yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the quote was, it was some media thing, he gets fast laps when fast laps matter. And that's a cool thing to be known for.
Yeah, that's a great quote.
And that's something that translates through every series. If you can focus when it matters to focus, you're probably going to be all right. Okay, he gets a Formula One seat, 1991. He is still under a contract with Mercedes for this whole thing that he was working on, like World Sports Car thing and all that. All these contracts conflict. I'll mention something later on about Nigel Mansell being under contract in the U.S. and then trying to go back to Formula One. It's confusing. But he raced for Jordan after Bertrand Gachot was imprisoned. I don't know. Didn't read into that. That's for another episode.
Okay.
So he gets to race one race with Jordan at the time was the team. After that one race, he moves to Benetton.
Okay.
I don't know. I can't. Again, contracts. And then finally, this is all in 1991, mind you. Towards the end of it, Sauber's going to bring in Mercedes as like a technical partner / engine provider.
Okay.
Mercedes still has him under contract from his previous work, and they have a clause that says if Mercedes enters Formula One in any capacity, you will be a driver for that team.
Whoa!
So he raced for Jordan, raced for Benetton, and now that he's on the hook for having to go race for this Sauber team. But he says, I don't want to do that. And they say, okay, yeah, we won't force you.
Wait, under contract?
Yeah.
In his contract, it says...
Yep.
Oh, okay.
Word for word, if Mercedes enters Formula One in any capacity, you will be a driver for that team.
I'd just like to say, before we continue, we have seen Sauber next to Mercedes, so it says Sauber Mercedes. We've seen it say Sauber Petronas. We've seen it say Sauber Red Bull. We've seen it
Alfa Romeo.
We've seen it say Sauber Red Bull Petronas. We've seen...
So he, again, one race with Jordan, then he moves to Benetton. He's racing full-time for Benetton. He gets the Mercedes thing, but he said, I don't want to race for you. And at the time, the Sauber principal or CEO said, okay, sure, we won't race you. Dumb move, because this kid was cooking at the time, right? Like, I would have taken him. Like, that was a clause. Like, he had no legal out of it.
That's pretty sweet.
But they said, no, it's good. So I said earlier I was going to leave you with Damon Hill in 1993. So I'm at Schumacher in 1991. 1991 is when Damon Hill was the test driver for Williams at the time.
Okay.
So let's go to 1992. This was where the rivalry starts, but I don't really think they're competing with each other yet.
This is his first full season in a seat?
Whose?
Schumacher.
No. 1991 Schumacher was racing. I'm going to go to 1992.
Okay.
1992 was Hill's 1 year in the then defunct Brabham seat. So he was completely non-competitive. Brabham basically didn't even field a car. He DNF'd from every single race. He collected no race completions.
Oh my god!
It was a very fraudulent season by Brabham. I don't know how they were out there. Meanwhile, Schumacher got third in Benetton. In his second year, he gets third in that Benetton car.
Oh my!
And don't you know that guy over at Sauber's we could have had him.
Yeah, we should have forced him at it.
1993. This is where I left you with Damon Hill. I'm going to go back to Damon Hill. He's now, 33 years old. And this is his breakout season.
So you're saying there's still time for me?
He woke up 33-something years old and said, I'm going to be a Formula One driver today, and I'm going to be good at it. This is when he makes that move to Williams, when I said he gets promoted up to Prost.
Right.
For most of the season, Damon Hill is ahead of not only his teammate Prost, but Ayrton Senna.
In 1993?
Yes. It wasn't until the back half of the season where he started dropping down into third, fourth, fifth every race, and Prost and Senna started getting first and second every single race.
Whoa.
End of the year comes, he slips down to third, and he gets beat by Senna and Prost, which you touched on.
And that explains why in that final season with Williams, Alan Prost getting first and McLaren Senna getting second, third this whole time.
Yep.
Damon Hill,
Very
and the
big deal.
start of your story.
Yep.
Wow.
So you had this generation of rivals between Prost and Senna. Immediately, this would have been a good time to be watching F1 on TV, with the drama.
Yeah.
Because there's no gap in the action. It's just one into the other. So at this point, Schumacher had gotten third in 1992, and now Hill is getting third in 1993. Do you know who got fourth in 1993?
I don't.
Michael Schumacher got fourth.
Oh my gosh. So it was 1, 2, 3, 4. We're talking about my two guys and then your two guys in the exact same year in the top 4 spots. That's nuts. So it really was kind of like the passing of this torch as you go from one of the greatest rivalries of all time into its next chapter.
And to be fair, if you're watching this 1993, you're thinking Senna's about to go on a run for a decade.
Oh yeah, because Prost is gone.
So you're probably thinking maybe Schumacher and Hill will be, fighting with Senna. Senna goes out, and now you just have Hill and Schumacher.
That makes a lot of sense because Senna was still young.
Oh, yeah.
He could have kept going.
Absolutely.
Well, he couldn't have, but you know what I meant by that.
I got you. Yep. Just going to move on. Okay. 1993, Schumacher finishes fourth, like I said. This is where it gets odd, and you think, okay, this is going to be okay. End of the 1993 season, they go scuba diving together. They go on a whole vacation together.
Wait, Damon Hill and Schumacher?
Yep.
So they're
I guess they're thinking
acquaintances?
I guess they're thinking, hey, we're both new to the sport, even though Damon Hill's 9 years older than Schumacher. Let's go have some fun. Let's be the next drivers, whatever. Then we go to 1994. So 3 months after their vacation together, things turn and they change drastically. This is the real start of their rivalry.
Okay.
1994, Ayrton Senna passes. We've talked on that a couple of times. Hill then takes a dominant role at Williams.
Sure.
He's the guy at this point.
Okay. On one of the most dominant teams.
Not only is Prost out of the sport, Senna's also out. You now have to carry the greatness of Williams at this time. Schumacher realizes this because now he's second in terms of the pecking order. So he is the Max Verstappen aggressive driver at this point, which I don't think he had to do. But he gets disqualified from overtaking Damon Hill during a formation lap at the British GP and ignoring a black flag being waved at him. That's why he was disqualified. Not that he overtook him. It's that he overtook him and then ignored a black flag.
I feel like I remember this interview with Michael Schumacher. Didn't he say that he never saw the black flag? But you know.
Yeah, because that guy's ahead of him at the time.
Right.
Because Schumacher had gotten third, and then Damon Hill has that breakout year in 93, and now suddenly Damon Hill's third and Schumacher's fourth.
Wait, so he passes him on the formation lap. They still have to line up on the grid. What, did he just line up in the first spot? Knowing that he qualified behind him?
Just did something to upset him. Or maybe they just DQ'd him and told him to come back in the pit, so they never lined up. I don't know. Huh. Hill then proceeds to win 4 races that Schumacher DQ'd from. So basically, Hill's taking advantage of Schumacher's aggression, Schumacher not being able to finish a race, and every single time he gets a win, that is so many points over Schumacher.
Okay.
We're getting to the end of 1994 here. The title battle goes to the end of the year. Like, we're talking last 2 or 3 races. Schumacher comes on an interview and says, Damon Hill is not a world-class driver.
Really?
They are fighting for first and second in the Formula One driver standings, and he says, this guy doesn't deserve to be here.
How do you figure? Because by my math, he definitely deserves it.
So that probably sparked a little something because that's now off the track antics. So the title battle comes down to essentially the final race where Damon Hill is 1 point behind Schumacher. Because when Schumacher was out there, he was essentially winning. So even though he DQ'd from a couple and Hill got some wins, he's winning a lot. So it's a 1 point battle at this point. They both don't finish the final race. Controversy. Michael Schumacher crashes into a right side of the track barrier. And so he's kind of just sitting there. As the Williams of Damon Hill is coming around a turn, he tries to pass him. And there's some controversy as to whether Michael Schumacher inched the car out a little bit further.
Ooh.
Because the Williams Damon Hill strikes the now crashed Michael Schumacher, and they're both out of the race.
Wow.
And so what happens if you go into the final race of the season and you're 1 point ahead in the standings and you both don't finish?
Then you win.
You win. So Michael Schumacher wins the 1994 season.
Dude, the amount of similarities between the BS and Alan Prost and Ayrton Senna story and what I'm hearing repeating itself in this Damon Hill and Michael Schumacher story, that's just beyond nuts.
So it was Schumacher, then Hill, and then, okay, now we're going to compete with each other. They compete for a whole season. In the last race, they crash out together. Like, what are the odds that they're those two? Like, what are the odds that he's the one coming around the turn when Schumacher crashes and it?
Of all people,
it's a story.
Yeah, I get it.
Like, you can't write it better than that.
That's great.
So Schumacher wins by 1 point in 1994. 1995, there are 7 different noted instances between the two on track. Crashes, penalties, disqualifications, etc. 7 different times in 1995. Both of them received race bans due to their antics towards the others.
Jeez.
So 1995, they're done playing games. They're not going scuba diving anymore.
Apparently not.
Here's the race bans that they got. Schumacher forced Hill purposefully off the track, caused an accident. And then in a couple races later, Hill collides with Schumacher under braking, which you mentioned in your story.
Oh, I did.
Pooh. At turn 1. So they both get banned from racing one race that year. They get replaced by their reserve drivers. I made the note that Schumacher raced more like Verstappen and also talked like him. You're not a world-class driver, right? You're not on my caliber. You're not on my level. I'm just here to race. I'm here to win. Damon Hill was more reserved. He's in his mid-30s at this point. I don't know what this 24-year-old is doing. But every time Schumacher won, they would interview Hill, and he would always say, the better driver won today. Really? Schumacher was the better driver. And meanwhile, Schumacher's like, this guy ain't world class. Just torching him. So it's kind of an odd dynamic. It seems like Schumacher knew he could be great, and this guy was in his way.
Which, everybody has their story.
Okay, fast forward to 1996. Damon Hill wins the championship by a mile that year because Schumacher had made the move to Ferrari, and Ferrari was uncompetitive.
Really?
Yeah, 1996. So Schumacher runs away with it. 1997, Damon Hill moves to Arrows and Jordan, both uncompetitive. Or maybe it was 1997 and 1998. My note might have been bad there. But he raced for Arrows and he raced for Jordan, both uncompetitive. So essentially, Hill's like mid to late 30s at this point, and he's had 2 horrible seasons in a row. He's won a championship. He's had bad cars. He's bad teammates with Arrows and Jordan. He's done with it. He made it to the big show, raced there for 6-7 seasons, won a championship, called it quits. So
Rightfully so. 1999, he's done.
He started F1 at age 32 in 1991, wins a championship in 1996, gets second 1994, 1995, and third in 1993. That's a pretty good F1 career.
I mean, it's not bad.
First, second twice, and third in a 5-6 year run.
And he just got better because he got third in that first year, and then it was second, and then first.
All the while competing with Prost, Senna, Schumacher. Like in a golden age of F1, this 30-something-year-old driver comes in and has a day.
At 32.
Going back to Schumacher, that kind of wraps up Hill's career. Schumacher was disqualified from the entire 1997 season for purposely crashing into Villeneuve. Yeah, Villeneuve. In the last race of the year at Spain. So essentially he probably would have won and they just wiped his points off the board like it never even happened.
Wow.
Also, Spain that year was not the Spain or Spanish Grand Prix. It was the European Grand Prix. This is a side note. Bring back the European Grand Prix and rotate it somewhere.
That'd be cool.
Not to the current tracks, to different tracks that they don't already race at.
That would be cool.
Genius idea. Because back then, I don't know if Spain was a mainstay on the calendar. I think it was just the European Grand Prix, and it represented Europe. 1997 does not define a career for a man, though, because Schumacher goes on to win 5 more championships after the 2 that he'd already won. He won 2 during the rivalry. He won 94 and 95, the years that Damon got second. And then he wins 5 more all in the 2000s.
I couldn't help but notice that 1999 was Damon Hill's last year, correct?
Yep. So, yeah, call out the years. That's insane.
So in 1997, 1998, and 1999, he had an uncompetitive car, and Schumacher disqualified 2nd and 5th. Now, I can't help but notice the very next year, as well as the next 5 years,
just wins it all.
Wins everything.
To wrap up the Hill and Schumacher rivalry, just to put, again, this is more an emphasis. Like, everybody knows Michael Schumacher is great, but Damon Hill had such a great upbringing story and the working to get where he was. And then not only did he get there, but he wins the whole thing and he's competing with the best. His first entry was in 1992. His last entry was in 1999. Let's compare that to Schumacher's career. You ready for this?
Okay.
First entry was 1991. Last entry, 2012. He racked up 13 more seasons than Damon did.
Well, there was a grace period.
I know. There was like 4 years off.
Right. From 2006 to 2010.
Yeah, he took 4 years off and came back.
But the fact that he stretched his career for that far, meanwhile, Damon only had, what, 8
He essentially
8, 9 years?
revived his career at the same time Damon started his.
Can you imagine if Damon Hill could have gotten into Formula One at some of the times that these other guys did?
Or maybe not even that, but like we see Fernando Alonso killing it today in the 40s or late 30s.
Just stayed in.
Just stayed in, but
around.
didn't go to Arrows, didn't go to Jordan.
Yeah.
Found a competitive team. And maybe there wasn't a competitive team willing to sign him. I don't know. It's really vague on the contract discussions. It doesn't seem it was money related. It seems like it was just kind of his time to move on. And these teams had a lot of financial problems back then. We talked about Brabham dissolving. Like, teams were dissolving. Teams were going defunct. They were getting bought out. And so you never know what kind of deal was made that just pushed him out of the sport.
Yeah, I guess when you put it that way, I mean, it makes sense. But still, it's one of those things where you definitely wish that you could see him entering and with his career being like, 23, 22. That would be wonderful.
Yeah.
Then you get to watch his come up when he's the young, aggressive driver. And then as he hits his mid-30s where he actually joined Formula One and he's got this mellow, calm side of him, he still excels. I mean, that would have been great. Because what if that one that he won was actually like his 4th or 5th because he was racing all of his 20s?
And he would have been competing with Prost.
Oh, yeah.
Senna. Maybe even Lauda.
I mean, yeah.
With his age. So yeah, that wraps it up. So we did Prost and Senna, the 80s rivalry in Formula One, the two dominant entrants in the sport at that time. Straight into Hill Schumacher, the young gun versus the old, worked his way up, finally made it guy. But I think ultimately they all had, you take Senna out of the picture, the rivalries themselves had good endings. They ended on good terms. They all had great careers.
Oh, yeah.
And you just kind of look back and you can reflect on like that golden age of F1 in the 80s and 90s where you just had these guys just destroying. If we missed anything, please let us know in the comments. If we got any of this wrong, absolutely let us know. But if there's another rivalry that we should look at, where's a hidden rivalry? Where was something going on for the 4th and 5th spot? That's much harder to find when you look retrospectively at history. But we know nowadays we're looking at the battle between Alpine and McLaren the past couple seasons. Where was that battle in the 70s, 80s, and 90s?
That's a good point, because typically when you're looking at the main media or you're searching through YouTube or you're scoundering through Wikipedia, looking at different articles or whatever it is, the only focus is really on the front runners. But where was the middle of the pack guys competition? Where were those rivalries back in the day where the cars were extremely close with each other and it really they did not like each other? I want to know. Let me know.
I do want to add one thing to the contract thing. I said I would mention Nigel Mansell. So Nigel Mansell, obviously F1 great. He leaves the sport. He comes back in 1994, and he had this contract dispute where he was under contract in the United States. But in 1994, Senna had passed away, and there was no current champion on the grid. And so F1 made every effort to sign Nigel Mansell even to partial race seats at Williams. So he raced with Damon Hill because Williams was basically forced to sign a previous champion for a couple races that year.
Wow.
And they paid Nigel Mansell $900,000, like per race, I believe. Yes, per race, compared to Damon Hill only being paid $300,000 for the season.
$900,000 a race
for 3 races, compared to $300K for a season for Damon, who later won them a championship.
Yeah, he was the champ.
So yeah, I don't know, but yeah, if we missed anything or forgot anything, or if you have any ideas for future episodes, definitely let us know.
I think that's all we got for you, right, guys?
That's all we got. We'll see you.
Bye.